Chasing Leviathan is a podcast about pursuing truth, one big question at a time through the discipline of listening. Truth is too big to tame, but if we pay close attention, we might get the chance to glimpse something truly magnificent. So please join me in this pursuit, 1 week at a time. Hello and welcome to Chasing Leviathan. I'm your host, PJ Wehry, and I'm here today with Dr. Yvonne Chireau, and we're talking about black magic, and just really excited to have you here, Dr. Chireau.
Thank you. This is
so
great.
Tell me why this book, why black magic, religion, and the African-American Conjuring tradition?
Okay, well, I'm really happy to be here. As I said, I'm always happy to talk about my work, if not myself. So I went to graduate school in the it must have been the 90s, right? Late 80s, at one of the premier institutions to study religion, which I didn't know at the time because things just happened. And I ended up working with the premier person, probably the father of African-American religious history, the late Albert Rabbitoh. And, I was a kid, it was a long time ago. There were a cohort of us. We were all brilliant hotshots, and we were there to do something. And I'm sounding glib, but you kind of have to think of what Princeton University was like at the time. And it was a wonderful experience. I'm actually very happy that I went there. But this professor gathered around him a number of Black students, Black scholars who were interested in big questions having to do with religion. And it was in the religion department. My degree is in religious studies. And so, like you do in grad school, you try to find topics, you do a lot of reading. But what Rabbitoh did, and his book is a classic, his book is called Slave Religion. He tried to understand the history, the experiences of African-American people from Africa to the Americas through the lens of religion. And so it's a classic book. It's been reprinted. Everybody knows about it. But there was one chapter in there that I was intrigued by, and that was when he started to talk about African-American enslaved religion and magic. And so, any grad student, you're like, I need a topic. So I decided to kind of go into that. And I think that's what people still do. It's like, because everything's been written on, PJ, right? So I wanted to expand on this idea, looking at slavery and the slave period, which is such a formative period for looking at religion, and look at this thing called magic, or, what hoodoo, conjured, a number of words. And I got a dissertation out of that. So that turned into the book later. Very fortunate at the time, no one was really talking about it. One other person was writing on it. So I was like, okay, And so it's really been interesting to me how the subject has this sort of staying power. The book was written 20-something years ago, and I get people calling me about it because there seems to be a kind of revival, if you want to call it that, or sort of a resurgence of interest in the material. So
yeah. Okay. And I'm sorry, I have to get this out of the way because it is just our culture. Why hoodoo and not voodoo?
Yeah. Well, if you go to my website, academichoodoo.com, it explains that. And I'm being jokey. The book is really because it was started out of the Princeton dissertation, kind of defending and challenging some of the theories of religion. So the book actually asked the question, why magic and not religion? And using the word black is sort of a play on words. So when people see black magic, people say, oh, it's scary. I'm like, no, read it. So I'm kind of playing with race, right, but also this category of religion. Now, this is where the problem is. Voodoo has sort of emerged as a trope. And I'm actually writing about this right now. My latest gig is about, you're going to laugh. My latest thing is about comics,
Yeah.
comic books, comic editor, and this notion of voodoo. Because the word is sort of a synecdoche. It's a trope. It is a utility term that sort of disparages religion. And so what we know is that there is a religion in Haiti. In the Creole, it's called Vodou. It's not voodoo. There is a religion in Benin, West Africa, Togo area, that is called Vodun. It is not called voodoo. So voodoo becomes in the West at an important period, and I'm going to have you guess when it was, sort of a junk term for describing African-derived spirituality as dangerous, as insurgent, as weird, as magical. It's not a religion. So voodoo is not a religion. Now tell me, as this is put your historian hat on, when do you think that term would come about to kind of slander or to describe African religion or African-derived religion as being very dangerous, very bad, everything that it's associated with? When do you think that?
Well, I'm going to cheat, and I
could
could be wrong here, but you mentioned comics, and I know that when you talk about the Ku Klux Klan, you see a huge revival in the 20s and 30s. So I would say 1920s, 1930s. I could be wrong here.
Oh, the Klan. Okay. Go even 100 years before.
Okay.
The origin of the term voodoo comes out of the cataclysmic event of the Haitian Revolution and the overturning of slavery in the Western Hemisphere, something that has never been done, and something that remarkably we in the West have sort of a weird, vague memory about. So within a few decades of France's revolution, the US's revolution, this little Caribbean island, the richest island in the hemisphere in terms of, the colonies, has its own revolution. And we've kind of blocked it out, but it was there in Haiti that African religion became a thing that was scary and terrible. And why? Because it was the religion of the rebels. It was the religion. So there's race here, there's religion, there's all these juicy things that we like, but we don't think about it. We just say, oh yeah, voodoo. It's a little scary. It has black people. It has magic. So I don't use that word because it's so loaded. And when I do my comic thing, which will happen eventually, I want to examine how it's been used as a visual trope too. Because when you think of voodoo, it's like, oh boy, I know what that is. No, it's not. And it really isn't a religion. So that's the long term. Now I do use the word hoodoo. Hoodoo is a word that sort of came about in the 19th century to describe uncanniness and strangeness with respect to spirituality. Now, no one has been able to tell me where this word comes from. We see the word as it applies to English maritime folklore. So there are hoodoo ships in the 1700s, ghost ships, right? Nothing to do with black people. We also, I think out in Utah, if you Google this, because people come to my website, Academic Hoodoo, from the Hoodoo ski resorts, which is hoodoo's. This is out. Yeah, I mean, it's true. But I looked into that, right? And hoodoos are actually, I don't know if you've seen them. They're these extraordinary, they're like mountain ranges, right? And lo and behold, the Native American people, and you should look it up after the show. They these sort of formations in the rocks, they look like people, and the Native Americans out there called them hoodoos to describe these beings that later turned into rock. Nothing to do with black people, right? So then, of course, someone said, oh, hoodoo is an African word. I'm like, okay, so I don't really know where that word comes from, but it stuck in the 1800s to talk about African-American magic, supernaturalism, and that, and even today people are using it to refer to a kind of magical spirituality. But it's one of these sort of riddles where you try to find it and then you don't get an answer, but it's kind of funny.
And forgive me, a lot of this is just coming out of ignorance. It's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to someone who was an expert in this field, like even the stories, one, we didn't really cover the Haitian Revolution, even though I got my bachelor's in history. Like it was like maybe like there was like memorize these dates, but we didn't talk about it, right? And then, excuse me. And then something was, when people did talk about it, they said that Haiti was dedicated to Satan. Like there's like this story. This is like an urban myth that was passed on. You know what I mean? Like this idea that it was like, we dedicate this nation to, I can't even remember who told me this, but it was something, and that's not me trying to protect somebody. It literally, I don't remember who told me. Someone told me that it was like, go ahead.
Probably someone religious, right? So, and we heard different kinds of things coming out of it. But I just want to go back for a second and imagine this, how important this is. The first nation, the first post-colony, the first nation to overthrow the colonial system with their own revolution, and then the first nation in the Western Hemisphere to have universal emancipation for all of its citizens. It didn't happen. All right. It didn't happen anywhere in the West except here. So why wouldn't we hear about it? No, we're going to talk about the devils politically. It's important, but it becomes over, the devils and the whatever become more important. Now, I actually think there's a little gaslighting going on there. Like, oh, okay, that explains everything that happened in this great nation that overthrew slavery, this ragtag nation of people that created a system, a constitution with universal emancipation, no slavery. Oh yeah, let's go back and talk about the religion, which the observers at the time, one observer in particular, called voodoo. He called it that. Now the term has become all kinds of things. So yeah, it's interesting, and never apologize for not knowing. I mean, we see these kinds of things going on now with our education system. People trying to cut out chunks or put chunks. It's like, how is anyone going to know anything? It's fascinating to me how this is really one of the most important events of the 18th century, and yet it's like a blip. And this is our neighbor. It's like a blip. Except when you want to talk about voodoo.
Well, it's funny as you talk about gaslighting. I have to confess, part of the reason I reached out to you, and I saw your book, I think it was on Twitter, it was like maybe a reprinting or something, and I was like, I smelled some gas. Let's be honest. I was like, it's pretty strange that someone would be like, I dedicate this land to Satan, right? Unless it's like some like stick it in the, in some kind of like Ozzy Osbourne way where it's like, I'm just trying to scare the, like they're like, I'm going to try and scare the white man kind of thing from Haiti, right? Like, I'm like, I don't think they would do that, right? And so this is, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, because I wanted to understand. And yeah, even, and what's fascinating, even as you talk about this difference between voodoo and hoodoo, and this is something that I have some degrees and, philosophy. I have a degree in philosophy of religion. My master's in that. And you talk about syncretism. And it is like human beings live very messy lives. And even that first part of your book, you talk about how hoodoo and this Black conjuring tradition gets mixed with Christianity. And that's something that makes people uncomfortable because they like very straight and rigid categories. Can you talk a little bit about how that process worked?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. People like rigid categories, or they go for, and I'm talking about religious folk, who I love, by the way. There's not a religion that I love. I had a student was like, yeah, what about Satanism? I was like, yeah, bring it. There's not a religion out there, knowing everything that I know about religion, that I don't respect and I don't love, because I know that religion is like art. I just lost my thought.
I'd love to come back to religion is like art, but anyways, continue.
Syncretism. So syncretism, of course, as you know, was one of the prevailing theories that I think come out of anthropology of religion, to try to understand how religions blend and then recombinate and then become something else. So, and that theory has actually been kind of there's a pushback on it with respect to Black religion of late. So what we know is at the time, Africans were coming to America, what later became the U.S., beginning in the 1600s, right? So, and then things really ramp up in the 1700s. So what you find is that as these enslaved people are flowing into the country, they are bringing their religions with them. So one of the myths was that, well, they didn't have religion in Africa. They just, they lived in jungles, and that sort of idea prevailed for a long time. And then Rabbitoh writes his book, and he's like, look at the religion in Africa. So that was actually huge. Now it's like everyone on TikTok knows that. But the idea is that people bring their religions, and I'm going to put them in air quotes because, the scholarship said, no, they were pagans, or what's the word they love to use? Fetishists. Religion isn't in there because only the Christian West has animism. Religion. So
yes,
exactly. Yeah. So whatever these people had, they brought it. Exactly. So right there, I'm starting to play on that with my thesis. So, but they were religions, and some of them were quite complex and sophisticated. And in the U.S., I love the irony of this. Some of these enslaved people come from nations that were already Christian, right? So, and we're talking about in Central Africa, the Portuguese, the missionaries always get there first, PJ. They got there, and they got there in the 15th century. And in Congo, where a lot of people come from and end up here, the entire kingdom converts to Catholicism, right? So they're already Christian. So these people are bringing in, their religions, whatever you want to call it. And some of them were Christian, some of them were Muslim, right? And so when they get here, what happens? And for us, for my mentor, that was the big question. What happens to religions? What happens to religions within slavery when they arrive here? So the idea of syncretism suggests that when people bring whatever they have, call it religion, magic, whatever, let's just say it's Islam or whatever, when it encounters another religion, say the Christian missionaries in, I won't pick on anyone, in South Carolina in the colonial period, they either hold on to it, they convert, but even when they convert, they still hold on, they still carry a little bit. The outcome is syncretic. The outcome is sort of a blending. And so that, I believe it can be argued, happened all over the place. It happened unevenly because, as you know, some parts of this country, they didn't really care for Christianity either. So that's another one of the myths, the myth of the Christian nation. John Butler says that until the 19th century, most people were not, he calls them unchurched, but most people had no interest in, they weren't Christians. So, so the syncretism, when it did occur between the African side, and it was uneven, it was regional. But one of the things that we see early on, or that I found early on, is that there's this thing that emerges that they call different names: conjure, magic, hoodoo. Sometimes they use the English word cunning, and that pops up in different parts of the country where these African people are. So yeah, the syncretism question is interesting. It also really speaks to this idea that whatever religion one has, whatever, it's responsive to the environment. So if you have, it's going to, even if you want to keep it pure, which I know, it's good, you're still in an environment that's going to inform it. So I think that's really important, even though it doesn't make people comfortable, because they, like, I have friends that say, and again, I love them dearly, we're practicing Christianity the way Jesus did. And I just sort of roll my eyes, without rolling them. And I'm like, yeah, because that's really important, this sort of purity. But on one level, I think it's impossible. So, and syncretism does the work of making sense of that.
Well, and that from my interpretational background, it's like, you can't just erase history, right? Like, you can never practice what is 2,000 years ago, because you like there are good things to that. Like there's a progression, and there's some problems that come, and those are new problems you have to deal with. So you can't just erase 2,000 years of history and like it's like I'm sitting at Jesus' feet, and it's like no, you are 2,000 years later, right? Even as you're talking about syncretism, and forgive me, this is just a personal story, but and I think it'll help. Like you talk from a race perspective. There's a race and a religion like pursuit for purity that becomes a problem sometimes, and it's like, oh, we aren't syncretistic, we are the pure ones, right? That becomes an issue, and so like for instance, as we talk about, I'm part of a church right now. Love the church, sweet group of people, and one of the things it's like it's very easy and it's very hard not to syncretize Christianity and capitalism, and so I know that's part of it, right? I know that like one of the things I've been trying to recover and talk a lot about is Sabbath, because there is no like this idea of a sacred rest day. In our current culture, it's like I rest so I can work better, and it's like no, that's not, and that's where and hopefully even as you talk through this, like one of the resources of religion are the roots that allow you to critique some of the pitfalls of our current culture.
Yeah, really. But I mean, let me just, I'm not going to challenge you.
No, go for it.
Because I'm thinking about this art thing, because when I say art, I mean the creative impulse. What if you really do experience yourself sitting at the feet of Jesus? And what if you go around wearing robes and you are living in this sort of realm in which, especially in the sacred space or the rituals or within your community, sometimes we call them Orthodox people, you are experiencing it in this sort of pure way. And that is an interesting way, the story of fundamentalism. It's like, yes, let's get back to the fundamentals of the way they did it. All right. So
okay, I have to stop you real quick, because I actually grew up independent fundamental Baptist. So like you are I have there's been a long journey there, but when you talk about this, yes, I am very familiar with this idea of, and I will say, and I appreciate you saying that, because I don't want to give the impression, I think there are real and powerful spiritual and religious experiences to be had, and in a very real sense, those are pure. But what happens, it's really, there's a sensitivity and there's a vulnerableness that happens with that often gets co-opted by people who, in the name of purity, and so I do think that's good to distinguish, because there is a real spiritual power and a real vulnerability, and just there's something very special that can happen in those like and pure in those religious experiences. So anyways, sorry. I'm very familiar.
And this is surprising. When we're done, I want to talk more about it. But no, and so you think about that, and I think that, I agree with you. But you think about slavery, you think about Christianity, you think about the long years of slavery, and you think about and you wonder. And this is again my Princeton education, and I'm not touting Princeton because there are other people who do this too. But that was the big question. How what is the relationship between slavery and Christianity? And again, my advisor really wrote the book on this. But if we're going to be pure Christians, there's slavery, because Jesus didn't say anything about it, and it's in the Bible, and so the good intention becomes sort of a rationale. And then there's those that say, nah, sort of, the Bible's kind of ambivalent about slavery. It's there, but so this question of slavery in relation to religious faith, it has followed us. It's followed us past slavery. We're dealing with that now, because religions, and I will say this, can't be counted on to deal with, because those people who had interest in enslaving, they even, and again, I have to tell you to read this book or to get this book. It's called Slave Religion. He talks about how Christian slaveholders They're like, too bad. We have to have slavery. Well, let's treat them a certain way, and let's just make sure they have Jesus. And then the reformers, as you know, they're like, this is outrageous. You can't enslave human beings. So if Christianity can't handle what we today think is a simple question, slavery is an abomination. What about these other questions like, women or queer people? So that's my rant. Yeah. I like to do that, but I also like to go into the problem and to see, well, what did people say about this? So, and I don't dwell too long in that in my book, but the big question for them is, what do you do with these other religions? What do you do with people who have gods that, don't look like Jesus or, don't even look human or whatever? What do you do with this? And I actually think those questions come down to us today. Yeah. We claim to be in a religiously pluralistic society. And one thing I do know is that Black America is extremely pluralistic. All right. And I just touched on that. I said African people, when they arrived, they were Christian, they were Muslim. Some of them came from ethnic traditions. So there's a religious diversity built in. But I don't think that we're doing too well with that these days. It's, I don't know. That's my rant about, the court and everything else. That this Christian nation myth really does prevail, and how we kind of navigate that is important. But I was concerned with the magic part because, and I still don't know. Is magic a slur? I mean, the coolest people I know in the world, the coolest people, and I'm actually teaching a course on this, are magicians. They're magicians for a living. And so, well, is that, I ask them, is that bad? And, my cynical friend is like, yeah, it's branding. I have to brand myself as a magician, but,
right.
So anyway. It's fascinating.
Well,
it's fascinating.
And this question of vocabulary is also because until I was looking at your book, I didn't know what you meant by conjuring. And did you say the English word was cunning? That was where did that come from?
Yeah, well, Europeans had problems with witches and magicians. It's, again, I would say, I want to blame it on the Christians, but it's not just the Christians, because the Catholics and the Protestants were fighting over this because you Catholics do magic, so I won't blame anyone, but they had an issue with unorthodox, or what's the word I want to use? Unofficial. I'm trying to use gentle words, but
you can use the mean words. Yeah. It's okay.
But it's not very scientific, but basically, the other, right? So in England, of course, where most of these sources are, there were people who were seen as practicing a kind of sorcery. But there were also those who, one of the kings had these diviners and magicians. So you did have traditions of what I call magic, because it's not part of the church. But then the priests, the Catholic priests, were also understood as practicing a kind of magic. So it's completely mixed up. But the term cunning comes from the English, usually talking about men in contradistinction to women who were always witches. Not always, but okay, women always get blamed. So men who were considered to have powers, they called them jugglers and so forth. And then conjurers were the same thing. Now, conjure is interesting because it suggests that it's kind of a trick, it's a fake. And actually, I would say half of the people who talk to me about my book think I'm talking about magic performances and shows and the professional stage magicians who are there were Black people who did that too, which I'm like, yay, everybody wins. But so, and I'm being silly, but in the 20th century, as conjure and hoodoo move north, guess who pops up? A number of Black magicians who perform, these shows. And this was the time of, medicine shows and things like that. Anyway, so this is what I'm trying to work through, how this idea of magic, it's good, it's bad, it's ambiguous, it's sort of this category. And then I think the most controversial thing that I do in that book, and I don't dwell long because you'll see it's a really short book, is I say, because people say, well, what happened to hoodoo and conjure? I was like, well, it went into, okay, you're smart. I'm going to test you again. One of the largest American religious movements occurred at the turn of the century in 1906, sort of originating this new worldwide global form of Christianity that involved both Black and white people. Do you know what it is?
I would guess
1906.
Pentecostalism. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I
you
mean,
got the
like,
A,
you
my
could
God.
see that. I mean, the snake charming.
love
Yeah,
it.
it makes sense. Yes,
I
yeah.
love it. I love it. So my argument is because Pentecostalism, and interestingly, Pentecostalism began with the work of a Black preacher and a white theologian, but everything segregated in 1906. So the Black preacher sort of institutionalizes certain practices, but they look kind of like what the conjure people did. Some of the spiritual, the Pentecostals are really into performance of what they call the Holy Ghost, but some of it, I argue, goes underground into these Black Pentecostal churches with their spectacular healings, because hoodoo had a spectacular healing element. And I got in trouble. I had all these people writing me, all these preachers, that's not from hoodoo, that's from the Bible. Okay, sister, you got it right, but you got that wrong. And then other people, they're like, yeah. So the argument is syncretism, right? And you can see it's kind of a dangerous notion, right? That these Black people, these Black Pentecostals who split from the white Pentecostals early on, again, segregation is the word, they are sort of not embracing it because they would never say it, but the interviews that I found in the 1920s, the government during the Depression had a lot of interviews with former slaves. They're talking a lot about hoodoo, and they're like, don't call it hoodoo, but it's similar. I won't go so far as to say it's the same thing, but if you pushed me, I would say it's the same thing. So it changes color. Magic becomes part of Black Pentecostalism and other forms of Christianity, and in places, of course, like New Orleans, where it's like that is the center, geographical center. You find this sort of mixture of not just Protestants but Catholics too. But you can imagine. I'm saying all this stuff. And people are reading it, which makes me happy because it is an academic book. But it's also like pricking. I'm like, no, how can you say that? My sister, she'll never listen to this. They don't talk to me. Because they're evangelical. I think they're fundamentalists, but they're evangelicals, beautiful people. My sister, I was just talking to someone. She is a more excellent version of me. She's a physician. I'm not going to give her name, but you could Google it. She is a big official in the last administration. She is a conservative Christian. They act as if Professor Chireau's work just doesn't exist, and I can understand why, but it's kind of sad. I don't know if this has happened to you, but I always like to believe that there is a vibrant intellectual tradition, whatever you are, whether you're a Pentecostal Christian. I like to think that Christianity has maintained that, because people used to debate these things. They used to have, I remember, full disclosure, I used to really be into the various Christianities, but they used to have stadiums, and the preacher would debate the other, and it was like the kind of sport that you see on YouTube. I feel in some ways that the church has gotten, and I'm going to generalize and say the Black churches, not that they're sort of like, because Black churches after that experience of enslavement really had to turn inward. And again, I can speak to that, or I could talk just about magic, but people are really defending themselves. So it's changing. I think it's changing with Black churches, but by and large, people don't want to hear this. It's like, this is all this voodoo stuff. But I think it's changing, and the fact that you're having conversations about this, but these sort of debates go back. They're not new to
Yeah,
us.
I mean, I think of myself, and forgive me for this is an academic discussion, but I think it's good sometimes to get personal because there are real ethical implications to this. And one of the biggest gifts that my own mother gave to me is when I was younger. Um, I just had lots of questions. I was that kind of kid. I was every teacher's either worst nightmare or biggest dream. Some teachers absolutely hated me because I wouldn't stop asking questions, and some teachers loved me. It really, I learned that as I look back on it now, I realize it said more about the teacher, but that's another aside. And what my mom said to me as I was reading Plato, in around junior high, and then reading Nietzsche in high school, which God is dead. My parents were like, she said, I believe that the Holy Spirit will lead you into truth. And that, like, as you, and this idea that I'm a devout Christian. I believe I believe in Jesus, that he is the Son of God, and I believe in God, but I believe he's not scared, right? Like he's not scared by questions. And that was a huge gift from my mom. And there are different, you talk about informed by the environment, and you even mentioned this with the African American church right now, the Black church right now, that but there are very vibrant traditions that you can dig into to inform your environment, that have, like, Calvin talks at length about all of the different way. Like, if someone is shining light, it's God's light, and it doesn't matter if they believe in Christianity or not. It's like, if they tell you the truth is the truth. And I think so. Anyways, I again, forgive me my sermon there, but that's, yeah.
No, I live for this in the classroom, because you can imagine I teach nothing but religion classes, and I always look for, okay, that kid over there, that's the fundamentalist, and that's the scared, and then I have my Satanist in the background, and it becomes this beautiful conversation. But the rules of the game are this respect that I expect we have for each other, just because we're human. That's lost when you're talking about some of these things, and that really, I think I don't even know how to deal with that. It's like, and I think it's gotten worse in the public discourse, because now people are doubling down, like, although I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope, and actually talking to you, it's like, wow, this is refreshing. So,
well, it's hard to really empathize and connect with someone in 30 seconds to 5 minutes. And I think that's some of this, without getting too far down the rabbit hole, I've talked to other people who are in, like, the technology sphere, and the kind of the medium is the message sphere, that one of the things our culture has developed this incredibly powerful thing called the internet and social networking, and we haven't thought through the consequences of what we're doing to ourselves. And I think some of the, even as we talk about this, the reason I'm in podcasting is this long form, right? That we're able to really connect, because you cannot connect in 30 seconds. And so, anyways, but yeah,
oh gosh, I'd love to talk to you some more about this. But okay. So let's talk about my book. Let's talk about me.
Talk to me about actually this is one. God bless you for keeping it short, because then I feel like I can just really grasp it. One of the most discouraging stats in my life is every time you say yes to a book, you say no to 100,000 other books. So for this, I feel like, maybe it's only like 50,000 other books, right? Like, it's really nice when it's something, that's like, I'm reading through Augustine's City of God right now, and it's 800 pages. And I'm like, I know this is a classic, but I could be reading so much more. Anyways, so thank you. This is the kind of thing, one, that really taps into kind of that fear of voodoo, right? You talk about the harming tradition, and then you talk about the healing tradition. Can you talk about those two traditions and how they grow beside each other and what roles they play?
Yes, and this is something, and people ask me about this a lot. And I actually coined that phrase of healing and harming with respect to these religions. I don't know if I would use them. I said religions, these traditions. I don't know if I would use it now. So I actually think that all magics are oriented at their core at a kind of healing practice. And when I say healing, I'm not just talking about healing of the body. One of the things that we see, particularly in enslaved communities, right? Close knit, under siege, just jealousies and passions, and that hoodoo worked as a mechanism to sort of heal relationships or to police relationships in communities. One of the things that we find, of course, and what's interesting, of course, is that hoodoo was used not just for, by enslaved people, because that's what I focus on Black people, but it's used on slave owners. So I get that all the time. Well, if magic is real and it works, because why didn't they use it against the white people to get free? And so one of the most famous stories that we have is David Blight wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Frederick Douglass. And one of the stories he tells, Frederick Douglass, our Black statesman, of when he was trying to run away from slavery, because flight was the way to go. That's what you did. That's how Black people resisted slavery. But let me tell you the story quickly. So he runs away. He lives in Maryland. He's like a kid. He's out in the woods, and he tells this story in his autobiography of meeting a conjure man, an African conjure man in the woods. So it's this. I can't wait for the movie because it's So he meets this conjure man, and he's exhausted. He's not going to make it, right? He's running, and so many Black folk didn't. And the conjure man gives him a root, and he says, "This is a magical root. It will keep any white man from striking you." And so, we know Douglass, he wasn't particularly religious. He takes it, he goes home, and the slave owner does not hit him. And then the next day, he draws. It's just a fascinating story. But so he's messing around with this notion that, there was some power in the root. And we know Douglass didn't believe in those things, like many Black intellectuals, right? So he sort of puts that out there, that this is what helped him survive. And then we have that very famous story of the, every time I talk about the tragic Denmark Vesey rebellion at the same church in South Carolina that was attacked by the white supremacists years ago, the very same church. So one of these historical ironies, the rebellion in the early 19th century was planned in the church, but it involved a number of African conjure people, and one in particular who, once the plot was revealed, they devastated these people. So my point is that magic was used in order to resist the system. That is the controversial part, because sometimes this kind of war involves harming. And you just look at Haiti as the example. Devastating, devastating. So healing is a part of this magic. Healing of the body, healing of the relationships. I'll give you a charm. You can help get that pretty lady over there. Whatever. Healing. And then the flip side is harming. And for some people, that's the line that they draw. Once you do harm, because there's do no harm. But I always tell that story. I said, yeah, well, what happened about that time when Jesus got pissed off because the figs weren't right and he killed the tree? And then they're like, oh, she knows that story. And I'm like, so cursing, and I know there's an exegesis and people interpret it differently, but basically I'm saying that cursing is not unknown in the Christian tradition. So, and I love to do that because I do know the Bible. I love to throw that out because, again, for some people, harming magic, and for me too, this is not something I like. That's the line that they draw. I will not do that kind of work, that kind of spiritual work. But I always say, try to imagine what it is like to live in a situation under slavery. where you have no agency. You don't even own yourself. So, you can't break the law because so try to understand what that was like. And it's very hard for us to see that. Even the meaning of, right and wrong is inverted because the good Christians are the ones who are enslaving you. So what's righteous and what's not? So, but the healing and harming thing, I see them as going together. And I'll just say this quickly. Where that comes from, I think, comes from there's an indigenous African idea of good and evil. There is no binary between good and evil. Good, it's almost like they're shades of each other. And you see that represented in their religious systems. There's no such thing as evil. I think that's a holdover in in hoodoo and conjure in the United States. I think
almost similar more to like a poison metaphor where it's like poison, it's medicine in one dosage and poison in another. And honestly, if you do, regardless of the fig tree story, you can go to what the Bible commands. And I think this is something that people who live in a developed country with privileged lives do not have to really, they can just ignore people because they are privileged and they just think they're not harming them. One, ignoring people is a form of harm. But also, like when you see in the Bible, it's talking about casting people out from the congregation, and it's never something you should be happy about. It's the idea of trying to bring them back. But this idea that, and without getting into it, I've experienced this personally, even in the last couple of years, where you have people who, it's not working. Right? Like if they will bring the whole community down if they are part of it because they have chosen evil. And unfortunately, in the case of enslavement, what you have is a whole society that's chosen evil. And that's even a different thing. But when you talk about harming, and again, if you think of it in this poison metaphor, it's like sometimes you have to push people out to get them to understand that in order to make this work, right? I was just talking to a young lady who I love very much, and she came from a very broken home, and she is constantly fighting for what she wants, even when everyone is very calm. She is fighting, and what I told her was, you are fighting for a place at the table, and everyone has made a place. This is a place where everyone has made a space at the table. And I'm talking at a very therapeutic and psychological level here, but I think everyone understands this. There are people who have grown up in situations where people did not make space for them, and they've had to fight for that. And obviously, I'm not talking about casting her out. I'm talking about the people who, for her, I'm trying to get her to understand. It's like, if you want to be part of this community, you want to make space for other people, and they'll make space for you, because that's the way it should be, right? It shouldn't be like elbows gouging each other, putting your head in the plate, trying to like steal as much food as you can. And so
yeah,
go ahead.
I agree with that. I believe that people are rendered that way, and it's strange. We live in a time where people believe that they're rendered that way when they're not. And this notion of scarcity, it's I'm not going to say it's killing us, but it's harming us. This notion of scarcity is harming us, and I won't say too much on it, but I absolutely see what you're talking about at a societal level, and we are harming ourselves, even though most of us, I believe, want to heal. I do believe that. I'm more optimistic than my Afro-pessimistic friends in some way, and it's fine. Yeah. It's fine. But so I see exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just kind of, and forgive me, I've talked quite a bit here, but I just want to make sure that we go through kind of your book here. You end with Conjuring the Black American cultural traditions. We all believed in hoodoo, and so if you could kind of sum up what hoodoo has given and the Conjuring tradition has given to our culture, and what is valuable about it, and what it voices that we need to hear, what would that be?
Yeah. Okay. And that's actually a great question. I'm actually, the more I do this, and it occurred to me the other day that hoodoo is the flip side of what voodoo is. Voodoo is an invention. Hoodoo is, and I see the young people on Hoodoo Talk. God help me, witch talk. I don't see
Right.
them because people said
Right,
I'm not on
right.
it. But it is a kind of there is a cultural not preservation is the word recovery, that this is the tradition that kept the ancestors, and for Black people, our ancestors, going. And as I've written, whether or not they're Christians, because a lot of them were Christians, they saw no problem in taking part in this in whatever way. So I think that kind of, and this is not to say post-emancipation, it didn't change into something. It did, it changed. But as far as enslavement, what it brings to us is first that sort of spiritual diversity that I talked about, that challenges the notion of the Christian nation, which I think is a pernicious myth, useful for some, but it challenges that. People are coming, as I said, they're bringing their own cultures, they're bringing their own religions to this environment in this terrible, brew of oppression and violence that was slavery in this country. So I think that people can now look at that and say, it wasn't voodoo. It was a kind of spirit. It was not even, if you want to call it religion, I like to call it a spirituality that enabled people. It healed them. It helped them to resist. And it is a kind of, I want to say, and this is what these young people are trying to do. I don't want to say too much because they're also selling it because it became a commodity. But the young people are seeing this and recovering this and saying, this is the tradition of my great, 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 great. And there is nothing to be ashamed of. Just like Haiti, there is nothing to, in fact, there's something of value here that we should look at. So that's what I see. But again, the internet being what it is, these kids, they are doing all kinds of, they make it up. And they might hear this. It's become a cultural trend
Right.
too. Like, But interestingly, there's a lot of, appropriation of hoodoo. And that actually starts in the 20th century, that white people see, there's some money to be made, and it becomes really a commodity. There's such a pushback against that now that I actually have to tell my students to calm down. I said, well, there were white people involved in this, just as, but it's sort of a claiming of hoodoo and conjure because it's ours, it's sort of this propriety thing. So that, I don't like that. I don't like it because it gets me away from the things that I want to talk about. But I see that this is a sort of a cultural treasure that should be, take another look at it. And it's not voodoo. And take another look at voodoo when my other project.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about the comics
project.
one. I would love to have you back on to talk about that. That's fascinating to me. Yeah,
really?
for sure.
Oh, it's so geeky.
I mean,
it is so geeky.
The reason I got
so
into interpretation was because of art first. Like, I was a literature nerd and I was reading, anyways. So, the philosophy was just an excuse to study literature more. One, let me say, first of all, I want to be respectful of your time. And also, it's so, I'm so grateful you came on today, Dr. Chireau. If you could leave our audience with one takeaway, just something to meditate on for the week. Not a summary. I think sometimes people think I'm asking for like, hey, if you could summarize your entire life's work in one sentence. But what's a takeaway, something that you would want them to meditate on through the week after they're listening to this?
Oh, wow. That put me on the spot. What the thing that comes to mind right away is magic real? Is magic real? What is that? And what do we think of when we talk about magic in distinguishing that from religion? If we want to get fancy, science. Is magic real in relation to these other ideas of religion and science? That's a trick question.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's
What does magic really mean? I love that because I think that's a great question. I will think about it this week. Dr. Chireau, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.